Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. Extra amazing. Krystal is back. What do we have today?
Always
Krystal?
nice to be back in the chair, although I watched you and Ryan's show yesterday. Fantastic, as always. So a lot to get to this morning. So we've got the very latest on Israel's likely response to those Iranian strikes and whether or not we are going to be dragged into a much larger regional war. We also have a little update for you on which politicians stand to make the most money off of said war. Trump was in court yesterday. It's the first day of his hush money trial, his first criminal case. So we'll break that down for you. Some interesting notes from him. Apparently a little drowsy in that courtroom, long day, you know, older guy. So we'll talk about that. At the same time, Truth Social stock prices continue to plummet. There's an interesting report of some of the significant small holders of that stock and how they are feeling about their investment at this point. We've got some major updates in Israel as settlers went on a violent rampage in the occupied West Bank. So we'll update you on that. We also have a number of Gazans who are trying to return north under Israeli fire. RFK Jr. saying that he was asked to be Trump's VP and also saying that he is no longer seeking the Libertarian Party nomination. That could be actually quite consequential. We have a criminal investigation now opened into the circumstances surrounding the bridge collapse in Baltimore. Very important updates there. And we've got a little Ryan Grimm scoop for you. He was able to get his hands, along with Jeremy Scahill, on the New York Times internal memo giving their writers guidance on how they should be talking about Israel's war in Gaza, and it is quite something. It is actually pretty shocking, even given, you know, my very low expectations for the New York Times. But before we get to any of that, Saagar, a little personal news here.
Yes, that's right. You may be able to see something right over here.
Slow reveal. There it is.
The gold plaque. It only took, 10 months to get it? Not really sure. Apparently there was a shortage in the factory. Allegedly.
Oh, is that what happened?
Who knows?
Okay.
Took a lot of emails, took some tweets, took some badgering, but the YouTube plaque is here. It feels somewhat anticlimactic since we qualified for it, like I said, about 8 to 10 months ago.
About 250,000 subscribers ago.
Roughly around 1.25 million subscribers, currently quarter of our way to the next 1 million. But hey, we'll take it. We're glad it's here. We just wanted to say thank you to everybody who is out there who helped build. We've helped build 2 channels now to 1 million, which not many people can say that they've done, which is really all entirely because of all of you. So thank you to those of us who have been with us from the very beginning or who have just joined. You guys are the ones who make this possible. And if you can help us out, breakingpoints.com.
Who knew supply chain snafus would even hit the gold plaque industry?
Well, okay, that's what they said was happening. I'm still a little bit.
I'm a little skeptical.
I'm a little dubious.
Kyle got his
I know
weeks
many
later.
People,
weeks later.
I know people who've hit 1 million and they get it like 2 days later. And you know, when I was rolling around in India, I even saw guys there who had their plaques that they had gotten within a couple of days. So somehow Google logistics are better in India than in America. But hey, whatever.
It's here now, and that's what counts.
That's right. So. We'll take it, and it is now a permanent fixture of the set. So thank you, YouTube, for finally getting it to us. All right, why don't we go ahead and start with Iran, as Krystal said. Kind of a hard turn in terms of what is currently on the horizon. So yesterday, we brought everybody the news that the Israeli government had vowed to retaliate against the Iranians. There was some question as to whether President Biden and his pressure on the Israelis not to militarily retaliate. He said, take the win. You got the win. Don't widen this into a broader war. There does now, though, seem to be a change. The U.S. government now saying that any response is up to the Israelis. This was John Kirby, the White House spokesperson, talking about this from the podium yesterday. Let's take a listen.
Is the administration presenting alternatives to Netanyahu?
This is an Israeli decision to make, whether and how they'll respond to what Iran did on Saturday, and we're going to leave it squarely with them.
Their decision to make, but are you making suggestions?
We are not involved in their decision-making process about a potential response.
So it's up to the Israeli government for what some sort of potential response is. Krystal, the U.S. government now has completely changed its tune. First, it was take the win, don't do anything. The Israeli war cabinet, immediately there were some deliberations. Both 2 members, Benny Gantz and Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, both immediately advocated for a retaliatory strike. Apparently, Netanyahu said, we got to hold off until I talk to President Biden. President Biden tells him not to do it. However, in the interim 12 to 24 hours, there's now been a change from the Israelis where all is being telegraphed from the IDF to the U.S. government, and now in the change of rhetoric where we're like expecting some sort of military retaliation. Yesterday, they had said at a time and place of their choosing, it is now expected, not necessarily necessarily imminently, but somewhere within, a shorter period, maybe less than a week. They said up to a month, but, we shouldn't forget, Krystal, it did take the Iranians about a week to retaliate on the embassy. We need to dispel like this notion that in a quote unquote immediate retaliation is just going to happen in the moment. That's not really how these things work. It can be a slower burn, but it is still, still accelerated on a timeline.
Yeah, I just want to pause, since this is my first chance to react to this, and reflect on the fact that we are truly on the brink right now. There's no denying it. We're getting some contradictory reports out of Israel about what a response might look like, what the scale might be. But Joe Biden is to blame with his policy for the fact that we have come to this place of potential broader escalation, potentially pulling us directly into a hot, wider regional war. And let's be clear, we've been saying this for months. The Biden administration's goal of keeping this contained to Gaza, that has long been over. You can see what's happened in Syria. You can see what's happened in Iraq. You can see what's happened with the Houthis in Yemen. And now, obviously, this direct conflict with Iran. It is because Joe Biden has given Netanyahu no limits whatsoever and allowed him to have carte blanche and consistently said, okay, while I might hand-wring a little bit, at the end of the day, you can do whatever you want. And so once again, that's the message that we hear coming from John Kirby. Hey guys, it's up to you. Do whatever you want. As if we aren't directly implicated, as if we aren't the ones who were involved in, shooting down these missiles and drones that were coming at Israel, as if we don't have service members who are stationed in the Middle East. It's complete insanity. And for what? So that Bibi can continue his genocide, can continue his ethnic cleansing, can hold on to power when, you've got a Democratic president who supposedly is opposed to a lot of what Bibi Netanyahu stands for. It is so utterly insane at every step. Even think about some of the things we talked about before, Saagar, like this policy of, okay, we're going to directly combat the Houthis and what they're doing in Yemen, pretending like we don't understand that if this war just ended, if we actually had a ceasefire, all of that would stop. With an acknowledgement, we know that the policy is not going to work, and yet we pursue it anyways. I think that's perfectly emblematic of how absurd, dangerous, and insane this policy has been all the way along. So I don't want to lose sight of that, even as we get into the specifics of what the likely response is, et cetera, et cetera. There was no reason that we would all have to be sitting here today with bated breath, waiting to see whether the world is about to blow up.
Yeah, well, thank you for reiterating that. It's absolutely true. Let's go and put this up there on the screen. The Israelis are reporting from their own domestic media that the War Cabinet, quote, has decided to hit back forcefully at Iran for the Saturday missile attack. In this unsourced report, they say that the War Cabinet has made the decision clearly and forcefully. The response will be designed to send the message that Israel, quote, will not allow an attack of that magnitude against it to pass without a reaction. The response will then be designed to make plain that Israel will not allow the Iranians to establish the equation that they have sought to assert in recent days. Now, this is basically about who is establishing mutual deterrence, because the Israelis, let's not forget, began this entire episode whenever they struck the Iranian embassy in Damascus. They claimed that it was an IRGC military outpost. It doesn't necessarily change the fact that it was still an embassy in Damascus. And the subsequent fallout from that then a week later was an Iranian response directly on Israel, the first in Iranian and Israeli history in terms of that attack. So then the question is, now what are the Israelis going to do? The Iranians said, we consider this matter closed. We have established our deterrence. We have showed the world that we can, if we want to, launch strikes from our territory directly onto Israel. The Israelis say, well, we've had a 99% shoot down rate. We'll get to that in a little bit in terms of how much the U.S. military actually did. But now the response appears to be that the Israelis want to establish a scenario where they are allowed to carry out this activity and bear no attack upon the Iranians to establish a deterrence from their end. So here is the chief of staff of the IDF actually speaking at a military base in Israel, in English, keep in mind, which is directly calibrated for all of us, about what their response is going to look like. Let's take a listen.
We are closely assessing the situation. We remain at our highest level of readiness. Iran will face the consequences for its actions. We will choose our response accordingly. The IDF remains ready to counter any threat from Iran and its terror proxies as we continue our mission to defend the State of Israel.
So everybody pay very close attention to what was behind the IDF Chief of Staff there. That was an F-35, and that base actually where this talk occurred is where Israel keeps its F-35s, which where do you think they got them and who sold them to them? The question and the big thing that we have to look at now is what that signifies for the response. So we're not looking necessarily at the launch of what the Iranians did, which were unmanned drones and or cruise missiles. Will this include a direct F-35 Lightning strike on Iranian military facilities? We're seeing a report this morning that is a little bit all over the map. It just says that U.S. officials expect the Israeli response to Iran to be limited. But what exactly does that mean? They say that both strikes are anticipated, quote, against Iranian military forces and Iranian-backed proxies outside of Iran. So the question then is, if they hit proxies outside of Iran, that's one thing. We've seen that happen many times. The IDF has been striking Hezbollah inside of Syria for probably 8 years. But a direct Israeli military strike, an IDF strike on Iranian military targets inside of Iran, that is unprecedented in the same way that the attack was, and is very much in the realm of where we could see an escalation. We also see a response from the Iranians saying that they will respond immediately if such a thing were to happen, in which we could see the escalation ladder begin again.
Yeah, and Bibi wants this conflict. I mean, it seems sort of insane, but from his psychotic political calculus, it actually makes sense because, number one, as we've talked about a million times before, wildly unpopular Bibi Netanyahu is within Israel. There is an increasing realization among the Israeli public that the assault on Gaza has not gone the way that he said that it would. They are nowhere close to accomplishing the stated objective of eradicating Hamas. That's why he also has to hold out there, oh, we're going to go into Rafah. That's going to be the thing that's really going to tick us over the top so that we can claim this victory. But there was an op-ed in Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, saying, listen, admit it, we've lost. This has been a catastrophe for us, not only because we failed to come anywhere close to accomplishing the objectives of eradicating Hamas or bringing the hostages home, and Israel's more isolated internationally than ever before and has this pariah status. So conflict with Iran directly gives Bibi another shot at some sort of ability to claim a quote-unquote victory. It keeps the war going, so it keeps his grip on power. And also, you know, while the news media is talking about this potential large regional war, what are they not talking about? The conditions for Gazans who continue to starve to death, continue to suffer. There's a lot of indications that the Israeli promises about increasing humanitarian aid were basically false, and that hasn't come to fruition. So the intense media pressure that was beginning to be applied in the wake, especially of that World Central Kitchen, the aid workers being assassinated by Israeli forces, suddenly that's all gone. And the U.S. and other, Middle Eastern regional allies rallied to Israel's defense, and the Gaza assault and the humanitarian crisis there sort of fades into the background. So for him, as utterly psychotic and insane as this all seems to us, watching it unfold, he has every incentive to escalate, every incentive to try to drag us into it. So, the fact that there's at least one report out there from NBC News that potentially this retaliatory strike, which shouldn't happen at all, they started this whole situation to begin with the strike on Iran's embassy, but that it may be limited in scope is very hopeful and very good news. But, we really have to wait and see what happens, because I'm not convinced that's where they're headed.
Well, this is the other problem, is that what does that mean? It's all in the eye of the beholder. Mm-hmm. Ryan and I talked a lot about this yesterday, which is you can look at the Iranian attack two ways. The Israeli right wing is like, no, it was calibrated for mass death. It just how happened that the defense was really good. Or you could say they telegraphed it for hours ahead. It was kind of a symbolic gesture.
Yeah.
Both seem like in the realm of possibility, and only the Iranians actually know the truth to what that is. So
I don't think you give 72 hours advance warning if you're trying to, calculate it for mass death.
I don't disagree.
But the right in Israel can certainly spin it how they want, because they are desperate and have long been itching for this conflict.
Yeah, but their response is just like, listen, and there's missiles and drones and all of that came into our skies, and that's terrifying. I'm like, I don't even disagree. But my point is that you can look and draw from it whatever you want. What could be limited to Israel and to the U.S., that may not be limited to the IRGC. Iran has its own major political military factions, which are all at war with each other. There's a huge contingent of the Iranian regime, which is incredibly angry that they haven't done more on the Israel and situation with response to Gaza. They already feel like they've been totally screwed by the U.S. and they want a full-on war. Are they going to win out? I mean, it's one of those where the Ayatollah himself, how much power does he really have? We talked about this with Tree Taparsi yesterday about the Iranian Military Council. So don't forget that they have their own internal domestic politics in a very similar way. There's also, let's put this up there, for what they've currently said in terms of their response. Yesterday, their foreign minister spoke with the British Foreign Minister David Cameron, said that Iran does not want escalation of tension in the region, but stressed if that Israel seeks adventure, our next response will be, quote, immediate, stronger, and more extensive. So the immediate, the stronger, the more extensive. So as you said, we may not get then, in this case, a change in the notification policy to the United States. There's also a big question around the Iron Dome and the amount of interceptor missiles that they remain. How much more U.S. military force is going to have to be employed in order to do something like this? How much is it going to cost? The single defense on Saturday's attack cost $1.5 billion. What if it's bigger? It's going to cost $10 billion, $20 billion? We simply have no idea. There's also, of course, now there's a reckoning, Krystal, as you said, as to the actual what instigated this entire thing with the bombing of the embassy. So there was a fascinating interview here with the former Prime Minister and current Foreign Minister David Cameron on Sky News in the UK, where they pressed him on what Britain would do if one of their embassies was bombed. Let's take a listen.
Is it bad judgment or good judgment to hit Iranian sovereign territory in Damascus?
Look, that's something the Israelis decided to do. We haven't made a... I know, well, I'll answer the question, which is, I can completely understand the frustration the Israelis feel when they look at the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and they look at the terrible things that they have done all over the world, including the support they give to Hamas. And, of course, Hamas were responsible for October the 7th, and that is where all of this begins. So you can completely understand the frustration.
Yeah, but what about Iran's frustration at part of its sovereign territory being flattened?
Well, I would argue there is a massive degree of difference between what Israel did in Damascus and, as I said, 301 weapons being launched by the state of Iran at the state of Israel. For the first time, a state-on-state attack. 101 ballistic missiles, 36 cruise missiles, 185 drones. That is a degree of difference. Yeah. And I think a reckless and dangerous thing for Iran to have done. And I think the whole world can see all these countries that have somehow wondered, well, what is the true nature of Iran? It's there in black and white.
What would Britain do if a hostile nation flattened one of our consulates?
Well, we would take the very strong action.
And Iran would say that that's what they did?
Well, what they did, as I said, was a massive attack.
So they were right to respond, but they overreacted, is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that the attack they carried out was on a very large scale, much bigger than people accepted.
They have a right to respond?
Well, countries have a right to respond when they feel they've suffered an aggression. Of course they do. But look at the scale of that response. Had those weapons not been shot down,
but they just overreacted.
There could have been thousands of casualties, including civilian casualties. I think that's a really important point to take into account.
Well, we would have a massive response. I agree. And look, I'm not justifying any of this. I don't want missiles flying all over the place in Damascus or in Israel because I don't want to be involved in it. And it's our troops that are the ones that are shooting down most of these missiles, which we'll get to in a little bit. But this is part of the problem. And we talked about this yesterday. A huge number of the American commentariat and U.S. senators were like, this is an unprovoked attack. That is insane. Ridiculous. It is like this did not happen inside of a vacuum. And this is part of the issue, the emboldening of Netanyahu and of the Israeli military, because we told them very specifically, do not hit the Iranians without clearing or telling us about it. And what do you think they did? They did it, and they didn't even tell us. No heads up to the United States. We found out on social media whenever this happened. And now, who do you think is responsible and paying the bill for shooting down all these damn missiles, and whose troops, tens of thousands, are all across the region who are sitting ducks waiting to take the shot if and when that this does expand, and the U.S. military inevitably is involved. That's what drives me the craziest about all of it.
And I loved this like attempted intellectual debate in the New York Times and other places. Is it actually a violation of the Vienna Convention and international law to hit an embassy? Of course, of course. If a U.S. embassy was hit anywhere around the world, whether it was, the embassy itself or an adjacent consular building, do you think we'd be having the slightest bit of debate about
by
that?
the way, I would say that we shouldn't. If you kill a CIA officer in a U.S. embassy, we're going to blow the shit out of you, and we should.
It's entirely predictable. I mean, and not only is it predictable, this is the response that the Israelis wanted. They were courting this response because, as I just said before, Bibi wants this conflict. He, for his political ass, needs this conflict. And so, of course, Iran was going to hit back. We're lucky that they showed the restraint that they did, that they provided the notice, that this appears to have been more of a, domestic political show for the Iranians to say, listen, you're not going to just hit our embassy and kill one of our top military leaders with no response. We're lucky that the response was that limited. But the two things that drove me so insane watching this all unfold is, number one, the Israelis immediately playing the victims. Oh, how dare you? And so much of the American political class and media class going right along with this, pretending, like you said, Saagar, that it was quote unquote unprovoked. Please get out of here. Another thing that has driven me insane is, now the attacks on embassies, like it's open season. That is over, because what could the U.S. ever say about it again when you didn't condemn Israel when they attacked the Iranian embassy in Syria? That's over. And then the other thing that I mentioned to you that made me completely insane is Israel immediately, we need a meeting of the UN Security Council. Well, you don't care about the UN when they're condemning you, when they're demanding a ceasefire, when a ceasefire resolution gets passed through the UN Security Council. You don't have anything to say about that. But now suddenly, we need the UN Security Council. What about a resolution against you for hitting the embassy? How about that? Would you listen to that? Of course not. So just so much of this drove me absolutely bonkers and is so typical of the incredibly one-sided way that we view anything through the media and political class when it comes to Israel.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It is so perfect. And let's put this final piece up of report from Ken Klippenstein. And it just confirms every suspicion that I had in the immediate aftermath, because the Israelis and the IDF kept bragging about a 99% interception rate. And if people want to, you can go back and roll the tape. And I said, I would love to know how much that the US shot down and the IDF did, because I was willing to bet that it was America and not them that shot down most of those drones and missiles. And lo and behold, the Intercept here now reporting the US, not Israel, shot down most Iranian drones and missiles. American forces did most of the heavy lifting in responding to Iran's retaliation for the attack. The United States shot down more of the missiles and drones than Israel did. More than half of the weapons were destroyed by U.S. aircraft and missiles before they ever reached Israel. In fact, commanding a multinational air defense operation and scrambling American fighter jets, this was a U.S. military triumph. The extent of that military operation is currently unbeknownst to the American public. Yeah, do you want to know why? Because CENTCOM, the U.S. military, and the Pentagon refused to release the number of missiles and drones that they shot down. They have only released the names and the units and the type of aircraft and the guided missile destroyers that are the ones that actually engaged here. And this just gives away the whole plot, and this is part of the issue. Some response, Krystal, that I got from saying that the U.S. military should, which, by the way, was one of the biggest freakouts that I've invited in quite a long time. I said, modest proposal, the U.S. military should defend America and not foreign nations that want to drag us into a war. And people were like, you don't understand. By us defending Israel, we prevented a larger war. But here's the thing. The Israelis would not feel so emboldened to blow up the Iranian embassy if they knew that they would also have to defend their own territory. This is part of the thing. They socialize the risk to all of us. And we're the ones, God bless us, who have the military capability to shoot down said missiles if we want to. By actually putting this blanket security onto Israel and saying, you guys can do whatever we want and we were still going to defend you, we actually embolden this situation. So if we had created a situation where they were going to bear the ultimate risk of the behavior that they carry out, they would be a lot more cautious. But they don't feel cautious because they don't have to be. And this is the exact proof that we need.
You're 100% correct. If they knew they were on their own, truly on their own, there's no way they would have taken that action. And you can actually see it now in the nervousness around a larger scale response, because there were at least some indications from the Biden administration that, hey, you are on your own for this if you take this further. So I think to the extent that there's any sort of hesitation on Bibi's part, it's from a lack of confidence that the U.S. will fully be behind them if they proceed any further. But yeah, and it's not just with regard to their defense, it's obviously at every turn. Whenever Bibi has crossed a line, there might be a little bit of tut-tutting, there might be a little bit of leaks to, you know, a favored reporter, but there isn't actually any sort of consequences, whether it's attacking hospitals, whether it's attacking refugee camps, whether it's mass slaughter of civilians, 2,000-pound bombs dropped, killing aid workers. None of it is really met with any sort of actual consequence, actual policy change. We get a little rhetoric change every now and again, but in terms of actual policy change, nothing. So why would he think that this was going to be any different? He knows that Biden will just go wherever Bibi leads him along to. And so that's how you end up with this completely insane and outrageous situation, an incredibly dangerous situation. It's because Biden has allowed this scenario to unfold. And it was incredibly predictable. I mean, from how we've been talking since day one about the possibility of this spiraling into a wider war. This was always an incredibly dangerous and fraught situation. This was always a very real possibility on the table. The Biden administration's people, by the way, knew it too. It's not like they were unaware that this was a possible outcome. They just didn't do anything in order to forestall it and, in fact, enabled exactly this dangerous scenario.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's a dangerous moment. I actually went back and checked. I had a tweet, and we did multiple segments about wider war on October 23rd of 2023. So don't let anybody say that it is not possible to have predicted all of this. It was eminently predictable. May not happen as quickly. People seem to think that international relations and all this just happens like day after day after day. But when you go back and read history, you can see it takes a month, sometimes 2 months, and all of this to happen. But we can go back and see very clearly this led to this, led to this, led to this. And in the moment, we have too much of a recency bias. This was inevitable. It's only been 6 months now that we're in this conflict, and already we're in a totally different scenario. Imagine if this keeps going, imagine we're going to be a year from now. It could be a total nightmare.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.